You need to know this. After we were all forced into going along with George Bush's $700 billion bank bailouts 2 years ago that we were told would save our economy, it's beginning to look like a new bailout may be just around the corner. Almost 100 banks who received over $4 billion in bailouts are on the verge of collapsing, taking with them our taxpayer loans. $3 billion were already lost to taxpayers, and the banks they bailed out collapsed soon after getting federal help. Many of these banks that are on the verge of going under aren't major institutions, but regional, smaller banks that did not have access to the $3 trillion $3,000 billion top secret free credit dollars, courtesy of the Federal Reserve, which handed it out like candy to the too big to fail banks over the last few years, and we only learned about because of Bernie Sanders' audit. Thus, if these smaller banks go, not only do taxpayers lose money, but even more of the banking market will get swallowed up by massive banks like Citigroup and Goldman Sachs. In other words, the banks that are already too big to fail will get bigger. So what will another bank crisis do to our economy? Here to offer some insights on this issue and some of the larger issues around it is Michael Hudson, president of the Institute for the Study of Long-Term Economic Trends and author of the book Super Imperialism: The Economic Strategy of American Empire. Michael, welcome.
Thank you, Tom.
Great to have you with us. Michael, first of all, is the failure of American banks a symptom of a larger problem that's causing other countries to decouple themselves from us, from the dollar, for example?
Well, the reason they're planning on decoupling is the United States owes $4.5 trillion to foreign central banks. It's running a chronic trade deficit. Its military deficit has been responsible for much of the balance of payments since the Vietnam War and even before. And so money managers on Wall Street have taken the $600 billion that the Fed has created, and they've moved it out of the country to speculate on foreign currencies and to buy foreign assets. So you have capital flight by the very people being bailed out, financed by the Federal Reserve itself.
Yeah, this sounds rather insane. I'm curious, just to give a little backstory to the whole thing. Richard Nixon, infamously, I suppose, took us off the gold standard back in the early 70s. What does that mean for us today?
Nixon didn't have a choice. From the 1950s and 60s until the early 70s, the entire balance of payments deficit was military spending. The private sector was just exactly in balance. So there was no more gold to cover the currency, and there was no choice but to take a soft gold. In fact, already in the 1960s, when I worked as Chase Manhattan Bank's balance of payments economist, every Friday we'd sit and we'd look at the Federal Reserve's reports on the gold cover of the dollar, and it was going down and down and down. And you could see in advance that the dollar was going to have to close the gold pool. That's what my books were about. And we're in the same position today. The war spending forced us off gold in 1971, and now we have been giving IOUs to foreign governments, but foreign governments are saying, what is the point of getting more treasury bonds when the U.S. government is never going to have the money to repay us? The U.S. government has sacrificed the U.S. economy and virtually destroyed its industry by bailing out the banks, leaving the debts on the books, and making the U.S. so highly indebted an economy that it's very high cost. Americans have to pay, on an average, 35 to 40% of their income for housing, mostly for mortgage costs, 15% for debt service, 12% for financial Social Security withholding, FICA, and another 15 or 20% in taxes. So the result is that before they buy any goods and services at all, American workers have to pay the financial sector over 2/3 of their income. No matter how little they're paid and how little they buy, they're already priced out of the world market, and foreign governments see that, and they say, why on earth are we going to take any more IOUs when the IOUs from the Treasury are mainly to pay for the Pentagon, putting its 800 military bases all around us?
Right.
And
isn't to some extent this lack or failure of the United States to generate wealth anymore, as we did from the 30s to the 80s, arguably, to be in the manufacturing business, actually be producing things. Isn't to a large extent that the consequence of this libertarian conservative notion that when governments invest in infrastructure, whether it's intellectual infrastructure like, you know, Northern European countries actually pay kids to go to college, or whether that's physical infrastructure, China and their bullet trains, South Korea with the most advanced internet system in the world, you know, that the conservative and libertarians scream, this is socialism. And so ever since Reagan, basically, we've stopped building the infrastructure that's the soil in which business grows, thus businesses fleeing. Do I have that right? Is there any reality to that?
Yes, there is. When libertarians say a country is socialist, what they mean is it's low cost. Every country that is privatized, every single industry, from railroads to roads to telephones to water, has raised the cost of privatization very substantially. For one thing, privatized industries have to borrow money and pay interest. They pay enormous executive salaries. They pay huge stock bonuses to their people and stock options. And the government doesn't have these costs. So when the libertarians say privatize the country, they mean raise the prices for education, raise the prices for Medicare, raise the prices by selling off your roads and turn them into toll roads, and they're turning the American economy into a toll booth economy. And that's just going to price us more out of the market.
Assuming that we're not going to quickly get the investments that we need, the mixed economy that we see in the BRIC countries, for example, that are all growing like crazy because they are investing in infrastructure, that the Republicans will succeed in blocking this. Is there any other way that we can make a transition, at least out of an economy that's dependent upon war?
I don't see how, because we're going to continue to have the war spending we're having. The Republicans are going to block local spending, and the states and localities in this country are so broke that they're selling off their office buildings. Chicago's selling off its sidewalks to be...
They already sold off their parking meters, and the Skyway. So how does this, what happens to the average American if the BRIC countries and the oil producers of the Middle East, BRIC being Brazil, Russia, India, and China, if these countries and the countries of the Middle East, who are the major accumulators of dollars right now, were to drop the dollar as the currency to trade oil in, to basically the international exchange currency?
They are dropping the dollar. China has made deals with Russia and with Turkey to conduct all their trade in their own currency, and they've decided, what's the point of having dollars if we can't get anything for it?
So, and this is a process that's going, but when it reaches the point where they no longer need dollars at all to trade in these commodities, what does that mean to the average American? I mean, what's the end game scenario here, and how far out is that?
It means that the price of imports is going to go up, prices are going to go up. It means jobs are going to get fewer and fewer. It means there's going to be unemployment. Their taxes will go up, and the government is going to say, we have to choose either to pay the very rich people the interest we owe them, or we'll have to cut back Social Security. So we're going to see big fish eat little fish. The big creditors are going to be paid. The pensioners, Social Security recipients, they're not going to be paid. Cities are going to cut back employment, and you're going to have an economy that looks like England looked after World War II. It's not going to be very good.
Right, which was very, shall we say, austere, to say the very least. How does all this interact with this current warning of these 100 or more bank failures, these small and medium-sized banks? Which is symptom, which is cause?
The bank failures are largely a symptom of the real estate bubble. Right now, if you walk down Broadway in New York or other major streets, you're going to find a lot of for rent signs in the stores up and down. The banks that are in trouble are the local community banks and the small banks that have lent mainly to small businesses, which mean real estate businesses, and they're going under. And there's no way of bailing them out under the current economic system unless you merge them all into one gigantic city bank. And the Obama administration's The principle is we want to create more banks too big to fail so that we can shed crocodile tears and say, well, we had to bail them out. That
Right.
seems to be the plan. Nobody has come up with any alternative.
Yeah, and this seems to be, you know, Lawrence Summers' dream. Thank you, Michael Hudson. Thanks so much for being with us tonight.
Oh, it's good to be on you.
If Wall Street wasn't calling the shots in the Bush administration 2 years ago, we might have ended up or have broken up the too big to fail banks for good. Instead, now it looks like we're poised for another massive bailout, and they're going to get larger. If we continue these trade and monetary policies, we may even be looking at another massive crash. From Bush to Boehner, here we go again. Rinse, wash, and repeat.